The Boss Hole Chronicles are brought to you by Real Good Ventures, a talent optimization firm helping organizations diagnose their most critical people and execution issues with world-class analytics. Make sure to check out all the resources in the show notes and be sure to follow us and share your feedback. Enjoy today's episode.
Welcome back to the Boss Hole Chronicles. I am your co-host, Sarah Best, joined today by the ever-popular, most amazing John F. Brower. What's up, Professor? How are you today, co-host?
Sarah, I'm great. It's good to see you. It's good to be back in the Boss Hole Chronicles studios with you.
That's right. And, we're in that weird period of time where I think Punxsutawney Phil did see a shadow. So It's kind of winter, but it was 65 degrees here the other day. And it also had 56-mile-an-hour winds yesterday. All that to say, we always want to take time to learn about ways to prevent people from sliding into the boss hole zone. So today we have another excellent subject matter expert episode. John, would you be kind enough to share about our guest?
I'm happy to, Sarah. And our guest today, we ran across each other, I think, via LinkedIn. And I think it's through a different association. But when I read Michael's information, I thought, oh my gosh, this guy is doing work that is very consistent with what we talk about with the Boss Hole Transformation Nation. So I am very happy to introduce today Michael Denisoff from Michael Denisoff Consulting. And before I read your bio, a little bit of your bio, Michael, welcome to the Boss Hole Chronicles.
Thank you so much. I'm very glad to be here. I'm checking out some of the podcast, and it's good stuff. Very happy to be a part of it.
Well, thanks so much. So let me tell our listeners a little bit more about your background. Michael is an expert in the disciplines of strategy and business consulting, organizational effectiveness, training and development, executive coaching, and human resources excellence. What I thought was really cool, because I learned this about Michael when we first met, he uses some rather interesting and dare I say, unconventional techniques. Improvisation is one of them, and survival training. And maybe we'll have a chance to learn a little bit more about how survival training factors into the work that you do. But he developed the executive training program, Leadership Live, which is composed of peer coaching, role play, and improvisation. And I would love to see some of our leaders in the throes of improvisation. I think that would be fascinating. He currently serves in the CEO role. He has been a head of talent, VP of talent management, all around organizational performance, organizational development. And let me just give you a list of clients with whom Michael has worked: NASA, Honda, Home Depot, Park Davis, and IBM, just to name a few. But he is in constant demand in terms of his skills, his background. And I have to tell you, one of the other things that was really cool, at one point, Michael was the youngest presenter associated with the Covey Leadership Center and actually knew Stephen Covey. Is that correct?
That's correct. Stephen was a real special fella for sure. To this day, there's a lot of things, obviously, from the 7 Habits and this being with Stephen that still come through and impact me today.
No doubt. And a lot of people too. So it's great to have you here. Michael, I think we want to start with our conversation with you has to do with something you had shared with me in a couple of weeks ago when we were talking about your perspective on the Great Resignation. And you had talked about, we have the possibility of missing the lessons of the Great Resignation. And we're going to dig into some more things and how you're looking at the world, but give us some perspective of what are some of those lessons that we might step over and not benefit from?
The Great Resignation, right? It was and is still an amazing time. Mm-hmm. So what we know during this, it was kind of born out of the pandemic. The pandemic, as we know, right, it exposed and surfaced and accelerated a lot of trends. So we knew that, right? So whether it was remote working, my company, we went from dabbling in it to doing it in like about a week. So I think that was true for a lot of companies with the hybrid model for sure. I think remote training also became, our virtual training became, accelerated. So I think it accelerated a lot of things, but also exposed a lot of things. So for me, the exciting part and the thing I don't want us to miss out on is the Great Resignation was really about exposing how so many companies, to different degrees, of course, but certainly to high degrees in many cases, are very toxic. So they're just unhealthy places to work. And so we've had this mass migration out of the workforce, So, if you remember before the pandemic, Gallup just had talked about their engagement, right? Engagement was, I think, at 30, I have it written down here, 38%, less than 38%. And if you remember also, a third of that 38% was actively disengaged, which means that they were sabotaging the company when they could.
Right.
And matter of fact, I just heard your podcast talking about the new numbers on that they're at a 9-year low. So even before the pandemic hit and exposed it, things weren't great.
Right.
And there's a lot of fluff about it. A lot of people reading books about it. A lot of people having opinions on it, but the companies weren't really necessarily dealing with what they need to deal with. So I think this is a great invitation, if you will, from the Great Resignation for organizations and people too, and workers, to really kind of reflect on themselves and say, man, do we want to go back to that? And the answer is no. Now there's always going to be a little rebound. I think people are like, I'm out of here, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then there's the social movements in the background kind of impacting that as well. There was the anti-work movement on the internet for sure, on Reddit and different places, and China as well, even, so. And people said, man, I don't know if it's worth it. Do I want to do this? Is it worth it? Particularly the younger generations, right? So if you look, the older generations were the boomers, like, I got a job, got to work, and then Generation X, me, right? The forgotten generation was, hey, let's have work-life balance. And then the millennials were like, let's have life-work balance. And then the Zeds are like, yeah, I'll try to fit in work. Off the clock doesn't mean anything to me. That's life. It's called living.
Right.
Some of it, again, you can make fun of the generations, and it's good to do that a little bit, but what can we really learn from this? Because I think there are a lot of people saying, hey, is it really worth it? And I, just an example too, I was taking an Uber, probably about 2-3 months ago now, maybe a little longer. And there was this well-dressed gentleman driving the Uber, and he was just, his vocabulary was particularly good. And I just had to ask him, I said, hey, brother, what's your story? Because something's interesting here, I have a feeling. And this gentleman was actually a tenured professor at a university that you would know. And he became an Uber driver. And I'm like, tell me why. He's like, oh, the money's a lot less, but I no longer have a hole in my stomach every day and dread going to work.
Wow.
So I think, so things like that, that's, and I'm sure you guys all heard those stories, right?
Yeah.
I mean, is it really worth it? Why am I working for it? Or the other side of it, particularly with, another Uber story, if you will. I get all my information from Uber drivers because they're great to talk to. This other one was a really interesting chap, and we got to talking, and we were talking about their Great Resignation. I like people who hustle, and I like people who like to work. And him and his wife had decided this. They were actually working 3 and 4 jobs each. And what they have decided to do was to work really hard for 3 or 4 months and then take 3 or 4 months off to travel the world. And there's that wanderlust part of me says, I totally get that.
Right.
And no, is it reckless? I don't know. Is it? I mean, you're not helping your career, but you're living life. So when you look at some of these social movements, particularly for the younger generations, they're like, hey, is it worth it? Right. Or the other temptations around things like FOMO, hey, I don't want to start discovering the world when I'm too old to enjoy it or my body's broken down. So I understand a lot of this for sure. But I think the big lesson here is companies have to really take a hard look at themselves and make sure we do it better in the future, for sure. Because it is toxic. I mean, you guys as consultants, you know that. You talk about it all the time. You know when you deliver a leadership class, when people roll their eyes when you're talking about what it should be and they're rolling their eyes. Where people say, oh yeah, my company's like being in high school again. That's a low bar.
Mm-hmm.
So, and again, I don't want to be critical because generally I'm a very optimistic person, but at some point you got to call it what it is.
Well, don't you think part of that too, Michael, is we just continue to repeat the same mistakes. I if anything, I think one of the lessons of the Great Resignation is if we haven't learned of what was exposed, toxic work environments, people put in management and supervisory roles that had no business being there, that we need to be better at understanding how to develop people. I mean, shame on us. I mean, that was built on mental models and an old framework that we had cultivated for the better part of a century. This is really an opportunity to learn from those mistakes and do it differently moving forward. And we can do that.
I'm brilliant. I couldn't have said it better. Yeah, I think So I think about, I've been, I was in the early 90s when I started working at Covey, and think about all the leadership books that have been produced, all the great programs, all the things. And things really are not that much better in organizations. There's still a dearth of leadership, right? There's still process issues. There's still communication problems.
Right.
What's really going on? It's kind of like me, right? I'm getting a few pounds. I know what I got to do. I know what I got to eat and exercise. Why am I not doing it? So same thing for organizations. This is a time to take a hard look and say, what's going on? I mean, even as a consultant, sometimes, if you go as a consultant, you'll say, yeah, we had a consultant 10 years ago and I have some of their stuff. Let me take a look at it. That'd be great. And it's like, it's the same story.
Right.
Over and over and over. And it's insane to me. And it's often glossed over even by good programs, well-meaningful programs. But sometimes those programs are used as a smoke screen, not to do the hard work. Like, I should look at myself. Oh, by the way, here's a good TED Talk. Whew, don't look at me now. Look at the TED Talk.
Right.
Yeah.
So
that happens a lot.
Happens a lot, and so that's why. And so my part of my mission, right, is I want to be a part of kind of shaping and getting it right this time. So part of that is, naming things, because when you name them, you take away their power, but also being very specific what the issue is, and then joyfully trying to fix it. For example, if I may, because I know you like examples. So there's a $10 billion company I was brought in to work for, and I had just come in a few weeks after they did the employee engagement survey, and the survey itself, the by far the worst area was trust and senior leadership communicating tests, and then there was a big gap, and there was everything else. So that by far and arguably was the thing they had to work on. So by the time I got there, they decided what to do about it. And I said, and I kind of reviewed their stuff, and I talked with them about it, this executive team. I said, okay, wow, this is really good. It's a good chance to kind of tell the truth to yourselves, to be self-aware. But what did you do about it? Oh, we're going to do a $2.3 million culture program. Okay, let me get this right. The feedback you got was you guys, them not connecting and not trusting you. But your answer was for everybody else to give them a culture program. That's correct. Right. All right, let me get this right.
One more time.
And so I had to be quiet before I got fired. But I think that kind of is an insight to some of the things that go on.
Sure.
What's going on.
Well, I love your idea of let's call it out. Let's name it. So let's just say that's a great example of the executive team or senior leadership being blind or unwilling to really embrace the reality of what they're creating. What are some other things? What's some low-hanging fruit of things organizations need to call out right now, Michael?
Yeah, to me, again, it always goes back to the leadership, right? Okay. So as you know, the maxim in the business is people don't quit companies, they quit managers,
right?
Which I think is true, has been true, but I still think it's incomplete. Because ultimately, there's a manager/leadership culture that the company puts in, right? So if you have a bad leader, it's really the company or the system that's allowing that, right? It's the system that promotes the weaker leader because they're a little bit easier to control. So you got that. Or here's a typical scenario, right? Let's say Sarah's a new manager of a company. We love her. She's great. Why do we love her? She's entrepreneurial. She takes charge. She's proactive. And so we put her on the HiPo list. She get her promoted. She's a senior manager, then to director, and then, then to VP, and then to senior VP, and then senior VP, the whole world opens up. There's these perks, right? There's deferred compensation. You're paying for Sarah's kids' private school. You think Sarah's going to rock the boat anymore? Be proactive, or is she good? She's good. For most, not all people, you know what I'm saying? So I think you got to really look hard at what's really going on. And because, as we say and not so eloquently is, baloney rolls downhill, right? So, and I tell you, every company I worked with as a consultant or worked within, everything good about the company, I could trace directly to the top, and everything not so good about the company, I could trace to the top. Because, when they talk about be the example, follow the leader, you are watched every day as a leader, and you set
absolutely.
the tone.
Yeah, there's so much in there that could be a whole entire episode unto itself.
Yes,
because leadership teams, they're really comprised of very talented, skilled, and often very nice hardworking, dedicated people, but unless and until they do something on purpose to create cohesion and trust at the top, it's not going to magically happen. And without it, the examples you shared come to life all the time.
Yes, and I get it. And what happens, you become very protective, right? And you see that a lot of leadership teams, they don't do the bold thing, right? They take the safe thing because, what's the old saying from the 90s, right? Nobody got fired for hiring IBM, right? So they play it safe and they kind of hide a little bit, and then it becomes protectionism, or how do we keep this, right? And we see this a lot. You'll see the leadership team set the strategy. Strategy doesn't work. Who gets let go? Not them. The workers, the staff,
right?
Who didn't know what it was in the first place.
That's right. So, and I think you see things like that, and you become, and there's that inner circle, and you kind of look out for each other, and there's a little wink, wink, nudge, nudge, and that goes on. And by the way, I get it. It's easy. And I always like to say, nobody likes nepotism unless it's working for them.
Right.
Right. And nepotism and cronyism, because once you're in that inner circle, like, sweet, man,
you're good. You're good to go.
You're good. And I'm like, maybe I won't be so critical of the company now, but so, and again, that's real, that's human. I'm just not picking on anybody, and it's a natural tendency, but man, how do we safeguard against that?
Right. And we will be right back.
With employee disengagement at its highest level in 9 years, your company can't afford to miss the mark when it comes to optimizing your hiring, management, and team performance practices. At its lowest level, employee turnover costs you $11,000 per person. And those are dollars you can easily save with the right set of people analytics. Real Good Ventures is a talent optimization consultancy specializing in world-class analytics specific to your people and the critical role they play within your organization. Gain confidence in your hiring practices. Keep the boss holes from driving your talent away. Design your teams for flawless execution and create a culture that offers meaning and fulfillment. Real Good Ventures has a family of validated diagnostic tools specific to the human aspect of business, because we know that all business issues are people issues. Visit us today at www.realgoodventures.com and bring meaning and fulfillment back into your workplace.
Okay, let's get back to the program.
You said before we punched record today, Michael, that you in the past have been very critical of CEOs until you became one, and as a result developed compassion. Can you kind of marry your experience as a CEO to some of these other challenges we've been describing?
I love it. Yeah, I think for me, to be a CEO, it's a hard job, and it's a lonely job. And even if you have, and I had great resources, I had my own personal, if you will, board of directors, and they were a bunch of people. Some I had coached in the past that were just really talented CEOs. I liked them. It's a tough job. It takes broad shoulders, right? And, and you kind of have to find your space. And I thought, I'll just walk into this because I'm good with people and I'll be able to do it. And there's some things I did pretty well, but man, you got to keep your eye on the finances. And that's a real deal, because all of a sudden people think there's this big bucket of money hanging around for you to give them to hire more people or to give out bonuses. And there's not a big bucket.
Right.
So what I tried to do in a lot of ways, this sounds really terrible. Now it was not a huge company, it's a smaller company, so I could do this. I was horribly transparent about everything. I was so clear about the budget, and in a lot of ways, I did the opposite of a lot of things that I had saw in the past, to be honest with you, because I didn't want to be that. But even with that, it's still hard, because then people got gripe about something else, or you're like, what's going on here? And I'm like, well, you're the leadership team. I brought you up to take this accountability. Why are you looking at me? So it's a tough role, and there's a lot going on it. I think particularly for smaller companies, it's harder because the CEO has to wear a lot of different hats. When you get a bigger company, it's a different kind of hard, because you're really externally focused. You're going on, the business channels. You might have to lobby. It's a tougher thing. I get that, but you're also getting paid a lot of money. So it comes with the territory. So you have to own that, and it's some basic stuff, which is, I was just listening to your podcast, right? In the end, it's about helping people be better human beings, right? How do you say you're sorry? Well, we know you did it. We know you screwed up. So just say you're sorry and get on with your life. Not like, well, there's a lot of forces going on, the economy and the supply chain wasn't good. No, you messed up. It's okay.
Yeah.
But it's hard. But it's a hard job. So I have I tend to be particularly critical because the buck stops with them, or the leadership team or the CEO. They make a lot of money, so they should be able to handle it. But I also know it's a tough job. It's not an easy place to be. And some people run away from that, and I get that.
Absolutely. I'm sorry. You're reminding me of an episode we did. Actually, it was the brainchild of Sarah, being versus becoming the CEO.
Yeah.
And in our work, and I'm sure you've seen it too, Michael, you get some people that move into the CEO position and they approach it with perhaps some trepidation, a level of humility, and saying, look, I've got to learn how to do this well. And obviously for most of the people that are moving into it for the first time, versus that hubris and the arrogance, and that ultimately becomes their demise or holds them back. And it's such a distinction between the two. And the ones that embrace the unknown and are willing to acknowledge, to your point, willing to acknowledge, I don't know this all, but I'm going to surround myself with people that can, that support and help and complement. We've seen some amazing things happen. And the ones that get really, really wrapped up in themselves, they struggle. That's a huge generalization, but I mean, I can think of very specific examples. No,
I think it's exactly right. Because, the key is, I try to really build a very strong leadership team, which was to my advantage, because it made my life easier and freed me up to be the strategic person I'm supposed to be, the visionary I'm supposed to be. But if you hold on to that, but by the way, it's easy to get sucked into it, right? Because I always say to CEOs, just know when people are laughing at their jokes, they're probably not that funny. But there's this compulsion to laugh at it. And it's easy to do that, or to be at a meeting and hold court because they have to listen to you. And it's easy to kind of buy into that. It's like reading your press clippings as an athlete. You kind of lose that.
You believe the hype. Yeah.
You believe the hype. And then, that leads to a lot of things, which is, paranoia, people just doing, matter of fact, here's a funny story. It was just crazy to me. And the guy was a good guy. He was smart, but was buying into the hype. And also he was playing a role that he thought the CEO should play. Instead of just kind of being his authentic self, which you guys talk a lot about, kind of play. This is what I think of CEO, and I'll play that role. And it's beyond imposter syndrome. It's that they're just trying to think what they do. But he had this one very talented marketer who was a high potential. He was really super high on her, and this was a cosmetics company. And one day she had a different opinion with him, and the next day she was not on the high potential list. And I'm like, how'd that happen? You were high on her yesterday. For 3 years I've been here, you've been high on her, and all of a sudden you're not. You don't want to be questioned, man. Your job as a great leader is to protect the deviant voice or the dissenting voice. Protect somebody who sees it differently, and get that involved in it. Not because when you start making sure, when you surround yourself with yes men, it never goes well for anybody.
Right.
Yeah, and I'm hoping there's a few CEOs, John, you and I know, one in particular who might be listening to recognize that there's a history and a theme of, discounting and disassociating with people who disagree with you, and everybody sees it. And then they stop speaking up. It's so dysfunctional. It's so
dysfunctional, right? I think John Wooden, right, legendary basketball coach from UCLA, said, if we both agree, then one of us is not needed, right?
Right.
Oh, and it's, by the way, it's hard, especially because, if you have something, your heart's set on something as a leader, or you think it's a great idea, it's easy to get attached to it, but you have to detach that. And that humility leads you to, hey, what's the right thing? Right. It's not about me being right. It's about doing the right thing for the company. And I don't have to have pride of authorship. My pride of authorship is I assembled this team, and I figured out how to get a whole bunch of really different and diverse people together to come up with brilliant solutions. That's the beauty of it. But it's hard to let go. I get the temptation.
Yeah.
I think I personally see more of that than the humility or the leader the CEO who is hesitant, to make a call and uncertain about their impact. It's oftentimes the opposite, like you described. It's people who, hey, I've been here before. I've done this before. I know what I want to do. I know what we need to do. Right. And they're just not open to that diversity of perspective.
I love that.
Pertinent to the market or pertinent to the product they're building. But it is the way to get to the best answer if they can set their ego aside.
No, I think that's true. I think especially with tenured CEOs, I've seen this a lot too. They had a program, for better use of a word, that worked at their last company. So they assume it's going to work at this company. But there's different people, different variables, different market. Again, the principles would work, the ideas of it. But man, to think that, I just plug and play and I'll just do my thing because I'm so awesome and I have the program, huge mistake. It causes a lot of, we had that at one organization I was working for, and they had this person, and I would always say, I think he's got like a 1980s playbook, and they finally figured it out. Yeah, he did.
Right.
We had to make some tough decisions, but and I get that, again, I get that temptation. But that's, again, John, to your point, I believe in your own hype. Me, and I think really, not me personally, I like to recreate really great CEOs. They just kind of, I don't say they start from scratch because they have the knowledge and wisdom, but it's a blank piece of paper. And of course, there's some things that the principles are the same, but how does it apply to the organization? What makes sense, which, by the way, applies to now this new world going forward. Everybody now is like looking for, what's the solution? Is it a 4-day work week? I don't know. Maybe, maybe for your company, yes, maybe not for mine, and so I think that's part of this is we're looking for something that is the panacea, which I think has always been the issue, right?
Yeah.
CEO flies to Europe, comes back, they read a book, and all of a sudden we're doing this book, and everybody flurries and spend $1 million, and then it fizzles with 6 months later.
Right.
I think the future is how do we make sure that we kind of make that custom solution that's still scalable, but we're not going back. There are some things, the world has changed. There are a lot of things, and I'm grateful for it. We're not going.
Agreed. Yeah.
And and so it's like, why would we, to use a biblical reference, why would we put new wine in old skins, right? We have to figure out what this newness looks like, and it's not going to be the same for everybody. But I have a client that's a manufacturing company, and they were talking about hiring this person to work on the line. At the end of the interview, this person wonderfully said, "Can I do this? Can I work from home?" You're like, there's your station right there.
Right.
You got to put the rivets in. So you got to really kind of figure it out. Matter of fact, even during the height of the pandemic, I remember I was leading a roundtable of leaders, and you have the Brady Bunch thing going on, and there's like 20 people there, and there's 2 people from 2 really similar type companies, size companies, they're almost like mirror images of them. And I said, how are you dealing with the pandemic? And one buddy said, "Oh yeah, our manufacturing workers do not want the office people here because that increases risk." And the person right next to him with the mirror company said, "Our people want them here because they want them to feel connected and that they're in it." That's just 2 similar companies with 2 different, and both worked. If it worked for them, go for it.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
So I think that's a lesson for the future, whether it's around, hybrid, there's some principles that people would want that I think you have to figure out how that works in your company. And you have to avoid some unintended consequences.
Right. But I think you just hit on the key. I had a young professional ask me the other day, what should organizations be doing? And I said, it depends on the organization, depends on the people. I said, there's so many variables that are nuanced to the organization. You're not going to find it in a textbook. You're not going to find it on a podcast. You've got to think about it. It's a grassroots sort of thing. And it's like realizing you can't treat every person the same way. Right. The old days of command and control have given way to trust and autonomy. And that takes a different kind of leader. It really does.
And it takes work, John, right?
Oh, that is
work.
It does take work, and leadership is work. Did you have a question, Sarah?
The only question I was hoping to ask is, Michael, have you ever been a boss hole?
Oh, I'm sure I've had my moments. I really try not to. I'm generally, I kind of just walk to my own drum. I probably was weird. Have I been a boss hole? I'm sure there's been times where I've tried to hold on. I was a little worried that things were coming out of my control, and I'm sure I got paranoid. Sure, sure, absolutely.
And oftentimes that's how it happens. We'd wander into the boss hole zone just because circumstances or whatever, and it's like, oh, I got to pull myself out of it. But
I took a wrong turn.
I took a wrong turn.
Real quick on that. And so, there was this one thing I designed. It was actually a pretty good idea. It's probably going to be $1 million idea. And the person who I kind of handed over to it said something the other day, and somebody said, "Oh my God, you're so great for doing this." And I'm sitting there like, "I invented it. Do I say something? It would be
Oh,
fair, but it'd be better if you just be quiet and you go through those things and you just kind of
Oh,
let it go and you're just happy that it's happening. People kind of know anyway, but it's
yeah.
hard. I get the hardness of it.
yes.
But at some point, you got to grow up and be a good leader.
That's
Yeah.
true. That is true. Well, speaking of growing up and becoming a good leader, I always love, our listeners love new stuff, cool stuff. Real quick, as we start to end, I would love to just hear a little bit more about when it comes to your leadership development practices, improvisation and survival skills. Just give our listeners, because we'll put this in the show notes and I'm sure we'll be able to point them to this, but how are you using those two things in leadership development?
Yeah, I'll talk about them two separately. So the improv to me, I actually took a couple classes with the Groundlings when I was in LA and some different things. My heroes
Did
have
you
always
really?
been,
Okay.
and I like it. It makes a lot of sense to me. Although I had my first teacher was really brutal on me. In my first class, I thought I killed it. And he said, "You're not doing improv. You're just doing shtick that you've done 100 times," which he was right.
Oh, wow.
Right. Because part of great leadership, we hear this stuff a lot, being present, being in the moment, right? It's the SN. So a lot of those principles, and there's some people who do this really well, they teach this. But for me, and this goes back really to a long time ago, I wrote my manifesto, what I want to do. Leadership is not a set of bullet points, right? Leadership isn't clean and crisp, right? It's hard work, we just said. It's kind of like when you get up in the morning and you jog. There ain't no rocky music and the neighborhood isn't running with you, right? It's not that glorious. It kind of sucks, particularly in Ohio this time of year, because you never know, Sarah, right? What weather you're going to get. Right. Or, I like to look at leadership to be a lot like true love. True love is not the doily and the red heart. It's actually taking care of your spouse when they're very sick and they don't smell so good. And the same with leadership. It's not these easy points that go from point 1 to point 2 to point 3, and it's great. And we have this model and we have an acronym. It is something that's raw. So I think the improv, what I would do, and it was fun. It was really more fun for me, to be honest with you, when I do this class. We'll literally have people, and we go through confidentiality, and we make sure we don't have people from the same company and stuff, and they bring in their toughest leadership challenge, right? And in the front of the room, I have a desk, and a file cabinet. We simulate an office, and they tell me, what's going on, and I usually play that person, right? I said, okay, let's see how you handle it. And they'll say, oh, I have this person, I don't know who does this. And I there's so many archetypes out there. I become that person, and you literally will see them getting frustrated. And they're like, do you know this person? I'm like, no, but I know people.
Right.
And what you're doing is feeding this person and making their day. And then we kind of reteach it. And then we try to improv it or kind of role play it out in real time. Because you got to know what it feels like. You got to know what it feels like when your amygdala is going to be hijacked or people are manipulating you, right? And so you got to really figure that out, but you have to experience that. So you could read 10 books on playing tennis that sound really cool. You could even watch some video of it because videos are cool. I get it. But man, you got to get into it, and the best thing to do is really simulate it and make it. I've had people yell at me. I've had people cry in the moment because we try to kind of simulate the moment as real as possible.
Right.
So that's the improv side of it. The outdoor survival school stuff is I've been doing that for 20 years with this really cool organization in Utah. And I wrote a blog that got a lot of play. It was about how do we deal with life in the pandemic? And to me, it's what we just do, right? Whatever comes your way, you got to manage it, and that's a lot like outdoor survival school. You go out there and most of survival beyond skills, right, is this mental. It's your attitude. It's how you approach it. So one of our core beliefs is you always compare down. So when we go on outdoor survival school, the first couple of days, we are out there sleeping on the ground, no blanket, no tent, there's clothes on our body. And you could be sitting there saying, man, at home, I got this, 30 below rated Columbia, sleeping bag.
Sleeping bag, right.
And I got nothing. Or, at one point you give them this, this little wool blanket and all I got is a crappy wool blanket. But if you compare down, you're like, this wool blanket is so much better than dirt. Right. Right. Or, and things come your way. Even in outdoor survival school, we try to walk that line to before true survival. We try to get close to that. You have to make decisions and you have to make the best of it. Well, COVID, notwithstanding the real impact of people passing and the loss of that, it is just something that happened. So how do you kind of take that resilience and you kind of make it work for you? And a lot of people did, right? A lot of people said, hey, there was good things that came out of COVID. I got to spend more time with my family. I got to think a little bit different about my life. I saved 2 hours of commute time 5 days a week.
Right.
So it's really about making that, and in fact, between this COVID pandemic was really tough because I had taken over this company. It was already immunocompromised. It was already in trouble.
Mm-hmm.
And then here we are jumping into COVID. But what I think made it kind of, I don't want to say easy, but kind of familiar to me. I kind of reflected on Outdoor Survival School, and I was around for 2008 doing a lot of strategy work.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, it's like, this is what we got to do.
Yeah.
And we're going to make the best of it. And we're going to come out stronger. If you come through that attitude, it makes a big difference. So certainly I would tell you, the outdoor survival stuff. But if I'm working on a book called Leadership Lessons from an Outdoor Survival School Instructor, because those lessons are there.
In both examples, though, they are in it. They're not reading about it. They are experiencing it. They are immersed in it. And that changes everything for sure.
That's right. Yeah. You want to see something? It's really funny when you get like, because I've been doing this for 20 years now, because I actually used to do it for Covey Leadership Center. You take out this group of super smart, super brilliant, tough people, leadership team, and all of a sudden they're in shorts and they get a little jacket and they're running around the mountain. They get scared really quick.
Yeah.
It's not their world, and then how do they push through that and grow? And particularly out in nature teaches so much. There's a lot of deep growth in that for sure.
Oh, I'll bet there is. Well, Michael, promise us something that you will come back when the book is published. We'd love to have you on here to talk more about it. This has been great. I'm just so glad we connected, and we're so pleased that our listeners have had a chance to learn a little bit more about you. I just want to remind our listeners, go into the show notes, check out Michael's information, his website. He's just doing so much really cool work, and we know you've got some pretty exciting things coming up, and please keep us posted on all of that.
We'll do it. It's been great to be with you guys. You guys are awesome. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. And we'll see you next time on the Boss Hole Chronicles.
We'd like to thank our guest today on the Boss Hole Chronicles. And if you have a Boss Hole Chronicles story of your own, please email us at mystory@thebossholechronicles.com. Once again, mystory@thebossholechronicles.com. We'll see you again soon.